story is a little bit long. It started in the 60s, actually. I know that dates me. That's the breaks. I was in high school when Senator Kennedy was elected and had proposed in his recent campaign speech after the Nixon debates something new called the Peace Corps. He had issued a challenge to the University of Michigan students during the campaign in October, and they responded with some 5,000 signatures on a petition saying, yes, Senator Kennedy, we're ready to serve. So amazingly enough, within, roughly 90 days of that, he had named Sarge Shriver to be the first director of Peace Corps, not really knowing what it was and sort of leaving it to Sarge to figure that out. Sarge remains not only our founding director, but our guiding light. I then went off to college, went to Occidental College in Los Angeles, and heard then President Kennedy and Sarge speak about the Peace Corps, and actually had the chance to hear one of the early returning volunteers come back and talk of his experience, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. I majored in philosophy, not a perfect major for Peace Corps or frankly for doing anything practical, but it did help me become aware of the world outside and understand it a little bit better. So when I graduated, I wanted to apply for the Peace Corps, but my father was the dean of the graduate college at the University of Arizona. He insisted I go straight into a master's degree program that might have a little more possibility of my finding a job someday. And so I did. I went to Johns Hopkins SAIS here in Washington, 1966. Anybody from SAIS here today? Okay, mostly GW. Don't boo the SAIS reference then. It's a good school, but I have to say it was quite academic and difficult, and so I pursued my application to the Peace Corps, and in 1968 went to Bolivia. 68 had been a tough year, and we'd suffered a very difficult time in the war in Vietnam. We suffered the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. in April, and then in June, after he won the California primary, that of Bobby Kennedy. And to be honest, I was ready to leave. So I flew to La Paz, almost fainted from the lack of oxygen getting off the plane, and started 2 years of working with the Aymara campesinos at about 13,000 feet on the Altiplano of Bolivia. Life is hard for the Aymara campesinos. They basically scratch out a living on a land that's cold and treeless and pretty bleak. But for them, they don't think of it as hard. They just think of it as life. That's the way life is. I worked as a community development volunteer with the Aymara campesinos for 2 years, and notwithstanding my philosophy major, I think I was actually able to make a difference by learning how to shear sheep and commercialize wool, by learning how to plant improved potatoes, by learning how to raise chickens for commercial purposes. Both eggs and chicken meat at 13,000 feet are pretty economic, and we got about, well, I'd say a couple of dozen families doing those things. And while I had to spend a significant part of my 2 years there reducing my expectations on what I could accomplish as a Peace Corps volunteer to the realities of life on the Altiplano in a true culture of poverty, I think I learned more there in 2 years than I was able to learn in 2 years at Johns Hopkins University, or Occidental College for that matter. Patience, persistence, and simply working to find ways to help other people improve their lives a little bit. I came back from my Peace Corps experience committed to becoming an agent for change more broadly, and decided at that time, this was the time that Ralph Nader was in full bloom, and there were legal assistance organizations being established. One of the ones that was most impressive was the California Rural Legal Assistance Service that was working on behalf of the United Farm Workers and Cesar Chavez's organization to make improvements in the livelihoods of farm workers in California. and Arizona, where I was from. So I decided to go to law school, spent 3 years at the University of California at Berkeley, and when I came out of law school, I wasn't able to get a job at CRLA. So I interviewed at a number of law firms and had the great unknown at the time fortune of coming back to Washington to interview with the law firm as well as with the State Department. I went to a firm over here in the Watergate complex called Fried, Frank, Harris, Shriver, and Campbellman. And when the crew that was interviewing me from the HR office took me around to interview with various people, they saw that a partner named Sarge Shriver was in the office. And so they took me this was almost by chance, in to shake his hand, which was all they expected and I expected would happen. Of course, when they introduced me as a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Bolivia, Sarge lit up, and he basically shooed all the handlers away and said, "Come back later, I'll give you a call," escorted me into his office and sat me down, and we spent more than an hour talking, well, not about what the law firm does or even my somewhat mediocre record at law school, but talking about what he wanted to talk about. Of course, he wanted to talk about Peace Corps and what I did in Bolivia and what it meant to me. So I had the wonderful, great, good fortune of being able to meet and actually work for a couple of years with the founding director of Peace Corps, and I've never forgotten that experience. It really, he offered me a job literally because I had been a Peace Corps volunteer and spent 2 years in the mountains of Bolivia. So I took it. Of course, I wound up doing some pretty boring corporate legal work as a result, and after a couple of years decided that life in the law firm wasn't going to be providing the kind of gratification and satisfaction as an agent for change that I had really been seeking. So I moved from being a lawyer to going into the Foreign Service in USAID and spent the next 24 years in 5 very fascinating countries, working in Haiti as a project development officer, focusing primarily on agroforestry and rural health delivery. I worked in Nepal on public health and on small farmer agriculture, again, even mountain-size terraced rice growing. I worked in Morocco, also on agriculture and public health, as well as a basic education program. I had 4 incredible years in Guatemala as the USAID director there during the period of the finalization of a 30-year civil war between the Guatemalan military and the URNG group, basically over land rights and the rights of the Mayan people. The outcome of that war was a social compact which really, for the first time ever, recognized the basic rights of the Mayans in Guatemala. And it was a major step forward for that country, and I was thrilled to be there for the signing of that peace agreement in 1996, and to be able then to spend another couple of years working to support its implementation. My final Foreign Service assignment was also amazing. I had the chance to go as the USAID director to South Africa during Nelson Mandela's presidency, the last year plus of his presidency, and help work with that country. These were the Clinton years, and it was really quite an amazing commitment by the Clinton administration to provide support to the Mandela administration and the whole effort to re-institutionalize and change that country from a segregated apartheid system that served about 15% of the population well and ignored or repressed and took great advantage of the other 85%. Changing those institutions in basic education, in the justice system, in the public health system, in the banks and financial institutions, in the private sector, is obviously a massive task that frankly is still in progress. But it was an honor and a privilege to be able to work in countries like Guatemala and like South Africa that were undergoing massive changes, to be able to work in a way that actually allowed me to meet with different people who went on to win or had already won the Nobel Peace Prize. In Guatemala, I worked with Rigoberta Menchú Tum to help establish a program to repatriate refugees from the Chiapas area in Mexico back into Guatemala and to resettle them. And I was able to meet both then Bishop Desmond Tutu, now Archbishop, retired, and Nelson Mandela, the president, in working. It was great. We weren't just in a receiving line shaking hands with them. You actually were meeting them because of what you were doing, because of your commitment that you'd made earlier to be an agent for change, to make a difference. That's the kind of privilege that I viewed as icing on the cake, as a reward, but an honor. I was literally speechless when I actually got to shake Nelson Mandela's hand, as you might imagine, and have been so grateful that I went into the Peace Corps and made this decision to do that kind of work in my life. Came back to Washington, spent several years in non-government organizations, including Save the Children, working on HIV/AIDS, and then had a chance to go back to Latin America, working in the Millennium Challenge Corporation on compact development there. Finally, in 2008, the administration changed, and I had a chance to come back to Peace Corps, my home, and I have to tell you how privileged and honored it is, I feel, to be able to finish up my career, my professional career, where I really started it, with the Peace Corps. So let me quickly just try to summarize three things that I thought Peace Corps did for me, how it affected me. First, it taught me what I mentioned in Bolivia, the true meaning of a culture of poverty, what it means to live with people who literally struggle day to day to survive, to help their kids survive, to be able to take their kids to a doctor if there is one within reach, to try to get their kids into school and keep them there, and to simply do those things that, frankly, almost all of us take for granted. That hot stove knowledge, that direct experience with what it means to live in absolute poverty has stayed with me throughout the subsequent 40 years and has been invaluable in each of the jobs I've had in terms of understanding what to bring to the way you do your work. The second thing is the value of being an agent for change. Mahatma Gandhi once made this wonderful quote that really should be the motto of Peace Corps. You need to be the change you wish to see in the world. And I really, that was a conscious decision that I made at the end of my Peace Corps service in Bolivia, and obviously one that has served me very well over the years. Finally, I just want to say something about the concept of service. As Sarge always said, service is the greatest ideal of the American people, and I just want to emphasize that service is something that becomes for you a mindset. It's not something you go off and do for 2 years, or you go down and do once a week at a food bank. Service is a mindset that you carry with you throughout your life, and you carry it into whatever you do. It's obviously applicable to any occupation. You don't have to work in international development to use your Peace Corps service experience well. You can be a teacher, you can work in a non-governmental organization, you can work in the Department of Commerce, you can go on to be in HBSC or Standard Bank or Citibank for that matter, and still find a way to continue to serve. So with those are the three lessons that I drew from my Peace Corps experience. And let me just close my comments by reading you this quote from Sarge that has always affected me so. He was about my age when he went back and visited his alma mater, and he spoke to them, and he urged them at the end of his talk. He said, "Break your mirrors. Yes, indeed, just shatter the glass. In our society that is so self-absorbed, begin to look less at yourself and more at each other. Learn more about the face of your neighbor and less about your own. I suggest this to you: when you get to be 30, 40, 50, or even 70 years old, you'll get more happiness and contentment out of counting your friends than counting your dollars, and you'll get more satisfaction from having improved your neighborhood, your town, your state, your country, your fellow human beings than you'll ever get from your muscles, your figure, your automobile, your house, or even your credit rating. You'll get way more from being a peacemaker than you will from being a warrior. And I've been both, so I speak from experience. Break your mirrors now. That was our man, Sergeant Shriver, at his best. So with that, I'd just like to thank you all for coming and take a chance on service. Thank you very much, everybody.